From the Fathead Studio in Speedway, Indiana, this is The Skinny.
Oh, there you are, sweet Jesus. Come back to Papa.
The highs and lows, are just can be pretty brutal, that place. But, I think that's what is so fun about it is the challenges.
I saw Will Power smack the wall out of 4 with 10 to go. He's still going.
Dixon?
No. Connor.
Oh, Connor, yeah.
Yeah, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, Connor, and, you got to pick a direction, pal, and I'll stick with you.
Oh, I don't know. You lose track about halfway through.
I go to move when it's full of methanol. Both of them are full of methanol. Big bang. I turn around and the glasses are smoking. And he goes, whoa, good thing you gave me those, right?
I'm Scott Dixon.
I'm Antron Brown.
Hey, I'm Ron Cap.
I'm Connor Daly.
I'm James Hinchcliffe.
I'm Jack Beckman, and this is The Skinny.
Welcome to The Skinny. Ken Stout, Rico Elmore sitting right alongside. The man back behind the controls is Michael Young, and we will not throw him under the bus and tell you that this is the third time we tried to start this show today. But he did figure out the brand new clock, so these guys are in an effort to help me so I don't mess up too badly. And then sitting right alongside, how about the 2003 NHRA Super Comp champ and 2012 Top Fuel Funny Car champ, Mr. Fast Jack Beckman. Thanks for taking the time, brother.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. Been a fun day so far, Ken.
Yeah, we've been busy. We did a couple of shows a little bit earlier today, Midwest Drag Racing Series, and had a good time with that. Man, I have, as I said to you, I had not called it an asphalt drag race in a number of years, and the fact that it's an 8th mile and it's pro mod, I forgot how quickly that happens, man. It's fast.
I just think it's cool. I can go home and tell my wife, remember how everybody made those comments about shut your big mouth, you're never going to make anything? I got paid to talk today.
There you go. There's worse gigs, right?
Right.
Better than a real job, I always say.
Fixing elevators. Well, at least they're paying me to fix elevators.
So here's my first question. I actually walked into to Rico's office before we started the show here today, and he was doing a little research and pulled up some of your runs. And I told him, I said, that's exactly what I was thinking my first question is going to be. So
let me guess. Epping 2016?
Yeah, well, it could have been any number of...
That was one of them. That
one
was
of
one
six,
of them.
yeah.
Could have been any number of them, but yeah, what is it like to be inside of a funny car, accelerating harder than any other car on the planet, and then instantly it grenades into a million pieces?
So going into the World Finals in 2012, I started running funny cars in 2006. I'd had some fires, I'd had some engine issues, I'd never had anything what I would categorize as major in there. And I thought, I guess I'm just that damn good, I'm not hurting anything. And then within a year and a half, 6 of them where the body left the car and went in the grandstands. And, people say, how come you're so calm when you get out of that car? How come your heart's not racing? I said, well, my heart started racing when they started the car and you roll through the burnout box. So when one of those things blows up, let me say this. It's not like you're accelerating from 0 to 330 in less than 4 seconds and saying, this is easy. In my head, I am always prepared. If something goes wrong, you do ABC right away. And that is parachutes, brake, fire bottles, or fuel, depending on if the fuel shut itself off. So when the body leaves, if you look at the slow motion, you're going to see me. And somebody from the camera crew said that was a great idea. You were shielding the fire from you.
That's exactly
what I said.
That's funny. That's exactly what we said.
And I looked at it, I'm like, well, first off, I'm not that smart. Show it to me in slow motion. I said, oh, I'm reaching for the parachute levers that are mounted on the body that's in row 10 right now. But you don't have time to think about it. When that thing goes off, first of all, it's a concussion. Secondly, it's a really loud boom. It gets your attention. And then as quick as you come back to reality, you're like, I got to get it slowed down. Well, when the body comes off the car, since the chutes are anchored to the chassis but hung on the body, they'll automatically deploy. Well, it took me about 4 times to figure out the handles aren't there, right? So then you go to slow down. Well, you pull enough brake handle when there's oil all over the tires and the car is going to slide and you're going to hit the wall. So it's bouncing. You got fire in front of your face. That starts to go down. Then you realize there's oil on my visor, and I can't see too well through 70 weight there. And one of the videos, you see me reach up and wipe my visor, and the car's bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. And by the time you come to a stop, if you haven't hit the wall, you say, still got 10 fingers, still got 10 toes, and I didn't wreck their chassis. You unbuckle and you get out feeling fairly good about yourself.
The fact that you thought to wipe the oil off the face mask clearly was not your first rodeo.
Well,
that took a couple times to think about that.
By the time you get to your 4th or 5th one, you're like, next time. It's in the old days when the guys drove the front engine dragsters with the big gas masks and the breathers and the goggles. A lot of them would tape rags to the back of their gloves because literally on an average run, they hadn't figured out a catch can for the oil vapor at that time. It would come out the breathers and go right on their face. And just a routine run, they'd wipe their face off, and they'd get back in for the next run.
So, as you can tell, obviously, he was in the game for a long time, drove for Don Schumacher. Doesn't get much better than that. 72 final rounds, 34 wins. The championship, as we talked about before, 2012. It's safe to say you had a very successful run. You're still in phenomenal shape and capable of going, I'm sure, given the opportunity. Talk to me about being in the game, getting in the game. You started off young. You had a door car, which has since been revived, I guess, the El Camino. But getting in the game and how difficult it was, and then trying to stay in the game.
That's a lot to unpack. I'm going to give that a shot, though. So my uncle, my mom's brother, hardcore drag race guy, and he still comes to the races, and he's just an encyclopedia. He's a Bob Fry, Brett Kepner. He knows everything about everything. I fancy myself a great historian, and those guys are just in a different league. He took my brother and I was 7, my brother was 8. We went to Orange County International Raceway in Southern California and just hooked instantly. And you say, well, what was it that hooked you? And I say, yes. It was the sights, the sounds, the smells, the shaking, the food, everything about it. I just thought this is larger than life. And every kid wants to be a jet fighter pilot or a rock and roll singer, but you've got to have some talent and some luck for that. This was the deal for me. And when I was 15, I bought a 68 El Camino from my dad. He bought it from the original owner when I was 13. I gave him the same $1,000 he gave the guy there. They worked together at Lockheed. And I took my driving test in that car on my 16th birthday. When I was in the Air Force, I took it to Lubbock Drag Strip in 1986. Made my first run down a drag strip at 19 years old, 15:06, 93 miles an hour, still have the time slip. And I just did a full frame off on that car a few years ago. And the cool thing is, and I know I'm going to skip over some stuff, my car got in Hot Rod magazine. Let me back up for a little bit. My dad, Bob, still alive. He lives outside of Dallas-Fort Worth, and very much a hot rodder guy. Moved from Maryland to Southern California to get into the hot rod industry, interviewed with Hot Rod magazine, interviewed with all the speed equipment manufacturers there. And one of them said, hey, man, you got a secret security clearance. Why are you going to come to work here when you can go to one of the aircraft manufacturers and make more money? He went to Lockheed. The rest is history. Him and my mom met cruising Van Nuys Boulevard. And I was so fortunate. My last funny car win was Dallas 2020. And my dad was there, and you get a cowboy hat if you win the race.
Sure.
And to get my dad, I think he was 83 at that point, to go up there and get a cowboy hat, I just thought that was the greatest thing ever. So my dad's dad had bought him the August 1950 issue of Hot Rod magazine. I still have that issue. I got a picture of my son at 13 holding that issue. My dad was 13 when he got it. 70 years to the month of my dad's first Hot Rod magazine, my car made it in there. I thought that was neat.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Yeah, the cowboy hat's quite the program down there.
I've been to Dallas a lot. It was the one race that I wanted to win that was still on my bucket list. And I didn't know it was going to be my last year driving. And there might be more opportunities down the road. I don't know. But to be able to do it then, I never thought, why me? How come I don't have a ride anymore? I think, why me? How the hell did I get so lucky and get to do this? And I think, Ken, it's 33 wins in a funny car, 2 in Super Comp, but I like the fact that you're thinking ahead. I want to get that 34th one in a funny car.
I'll give you that. We're going to take a quick break here. We'll be right back in just a moment.
My first dragster was a used car. The trailer was this tall, and everybody I know has scars to prove it.
The Skinny is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota, let's go places. Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. And General Tires. General Tires delivers.
Welcome back to the Skinny. We have Fast Jack Beckman sitting in the studio with us today, and Jack also enlisted out of high school into the Air Force. Eventually became a lieutenant, and right away when he came into the Fathead Studios here, Rico has some really cool photographs lining the hallways here, and one of the things that caught your eye was that fighter jet. Immediately he said, "Who is that?" And that was your dad.
Yeah. So that's pretty special. There's not a lot of people that pick up on it. I mean, they may ask who it is, but March of 11 ended up losing him. Was like you said, amazing stories the Air Force provided for him, and flying all over the world. And one of my favorites, and I'll make it very quick, but one of my favorites was, they were flying into, I want to say into Texas, and was it Big Springs? Did they used to have
Out in the middle of nowhere?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So they're flying in there, and the guy that was flying second seat with him and whatever it was they were flying, his last name was Yeager. So let's think about that in the 50s, right? So, they
It was
hit,
Fred Yeager, no relation, but it sounded cool at the time.
You're close. You're very close. So, they hit them, they key it up, and, Yeager and Elmore on approach, blah, 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 or whatever it was. However it was, they knew that this guy's name was Yeager, and they had heard it over the radio. Well, by the time they landed and got out of the plane, there was 1,000 people on the tarmac waiting for him. And the one person said to my dad, they said, well, where's Chuck Yeager? They said, no, this is Bill Yeager.
Oh, that's hilarious. And I ruined your bit there, yeah. And they're spelled different, but other than that, he'll
By
sign
the way,
autographs.
that's a big fat foul. That's a red light, buddy.
Apologize for that, yeah. First mistake this year.
Yeah.
You got me.
So how was tell us a little bit about the Air Force.
Well, you're being generous. I went in enlisted, and I never graduated high school. I actually dropped out of high school, went to work at the company that became Harbor Freight Tools, unloading tool trucks all day.
That stuff doesn't weigh that much, I heard.
Did the floor jacks back then weren't aluminum?
Yeah.
Didn't take long to realize this is not what I want to keep doing with my life. So I went and interviewed with the Army, went over to the Navy, took the test under them. Air Force couldn't take me because I wasn't a high school graduate. Scored well enough on the test that later on I wound up going in the Air Force. Best decision I ever made. It doesn't mean there were a lot of easy days. Couldn't wait to get out. But when I look back, fond memories. I still have a lot of friends. And military people, it's hard to explain to other people. 10 years can go by in a conversation, and you can pick up the telephone, and you don't miss out on anything. There's no compulsion to have to call them. There's no guilt about, hey, man, you didn't call when my daughter graduated. It's just we're enjoying the time here and now, and we have great memories together.
Yeah, that's awesome. Where were you stationed? A few memorables.
Yes, I did a 3.5-year sentence at Clovis Air Force Base, Cannon, New Mexico. Or Cannon Air Force Base, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's... I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and it was a little bit of culture shock going to a small town and a lot of Air Force bases are purposely set out in the middle of nowhere. But it kind of forces you to turn inward and turn outward, if that makes sense. In other words, you get to know yourself a little bit better, and you make friends that you may not have made at home because you come from such diverse backgrounds. And it's hard to put a price tag on that. College education is great, but I wouldn't trade anything for the time I had in the military.
Yeah, that's... my father was at IU, was a business major, went out of IU straight into the Air Force, but he, he would tell. You were saying, I bet he had some great stories. He and his buddies, they were like the original wedding crashers, and so he was telling me they would fly in, and the officers would generally always stay in hotels. They would not have to stay on base. Is the way I understood it, what have you. But, so they're staying at a hotel. Well, what used to happen at hotels in the 50s? Weddings or wedding receptions, right? There'd be a wedding reception going on. They would walk in and their stuff. Nobody would know who they were. Is that Bill's son? Or is that? And by the time they figured out who they were hammered. They were already
best friends with everybody. It didn't matter.
And they had a stomach full of food, so if they threw them out by then, they were good. They had a great night. So, but he was telling me that story. I was like, yeah.
Did he play the Owen Wilson part or the Will Ferrell part?
Yeah. I'm not sure.
More the Vince Vaughn.
Yeah, Vince Vaughn.
Yeah, good stuff, man. No doubt. You were avionics technician, so you started off age 7. Loved drag racing, got the El Camino going. You get out of high school, into the service. You get out of the service.
Well, in the service, made my first run at Lubbock. And then when I got out in 88, I started racing regularly at my local track at that time was Los Angeles County Raceway. And at that point, I would drive anything that anybody had because I didn't have a famous last name and I didn't have rich parents. And how are you going to make it in drag racing if you don't get the background? And Westinghouse elevator, actually... I went and interviewed with several companies, including Westinghouse Elevator. And then I went on the road with Tim Gross and NHRA Funny Car on 2 days' notice because it's what I wanted to do. And I had been gone for 4 years, and he says, here's what we're going to do this on a Friday night. Remember this well. He says, be at my shop at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Going to work all day. Come back with your bags Sunday at 10. We're leaving. We'll be gone for 7 months. I said, okay, I'm ready to go. Now, it didn't work out. We've gone for 3 races in a month, and he wasn't getting funny. And I came back home, took the job with Westinghouse, raced my car on all the weekends, and just I never had a vacation day. Never. I worked every day and all the overtime I could get because every other day was spent at the drag strip. And, you know, that's something that's hard to teach in people is the input versus output, right? If you work this amount of time, you can enjoy this. And as a sportsman racer, when you don't have a full-time crew and you're doing everything yourself, you get a pretty good appreciation for time management and money management.
That is, no truer words could be spoken. And you go over into the other side, to the sportsman side, you see a lot of that. And there's a lot of big rigs over on the sportsman side now, whereas, you know, used to, it was never like that.
I don't know what a lot of these guys do for a living, and gals, because when you see 2 junior dragsters roll in a 50-foot rig with a toter home, I'm oh my God. You know, my first dragster was a used car. The trailer was this tall, and everybody I know has scars to prove it. I towed with a 73 motorhome. Then I really stepped up and bought a 78 Dodge motorhome. A 73 Suburban, and then bought a 78 Dodge motorhome, affectionately known as Chitty, because things fell off of it and it made noise. I became a great motorhome mechanic based on that. But I've never lived above my means. Let me say it in a better way. I've always lived below my means. I've always lived thinking if I'm off of work for 3 months, I'm not going to have to move back home. I'm not going to have to borrow from my friends. And I think that that's a good adage. And I don't think hardly anybody does that anymore. I carry credit card debt and whatnot. I guess that comes from my parents instilling that in me at a young age.
There were countless stories of some guy named John Forrest pulling up to the gates at Englishtown and going to sleep in his truck, you know, waiting for them to open up the gates the next day so he could get in and put on a show. So there's a lot of people in drag racing that have certainly come from modest means and digging hard, working hard, just trying to make the dream come alive. So pretty cool stuff. Hey, we're going to take a quick break here. Young aspiring Jack Beckman, trying to make his way into drag racing, finally found a crack in the seam. We're going to talk about that when we come back.
They said, can you drive our car? We borrowed a fire suit. I don't know if Jim Head knows, but one of his crew guys, because the pro rigs had parked there for the national event the next week, he said, we're duct taping over all his name. It's a spare fire suit. Don't you ever tell anybody that we loaned this to you, or it'll be my butt there.
We welcome you back to the Skinny. We have Jack Beckman in the studio with us. Spent a little bit of time with him earlier today. It was nice. First time we've worked together. Absolutely on fire. That brain works quickly no matter what, whether he's in a funny car or not. And we've been talking about him trying to get into this sport as a young person whose parents didn't have the money, didn't have any real funds to break his way in. The story is countless across the country, across the world, really. But you finally get an opportunity to go to some drag racing school called
The Frank Hawley Drag Racing School. Yeah, and I knew who Frank was. He won the 82 and 3 funny car championships. And he was just a badass in a bad race car with Austin coil tuning. And to me, all these people seemed like they were 8 feet tall. I've got asked, I'm going to jump ahead for a second, but I've got asked many times by people writing stories, what's your greatest accomplishment in drag racing? And I know I'm not giving them the answer they were looking for, but my answer is simple and it's always the same. It's the fact that I can walk into a room with the people that I think are absolute legends and they know my name. And I don't mean they know my name from a narcissistic, that's easy to say, narcissistic standpoint. It's that we're friends. Roland Leong, Dom Prudhomme, Chris Karamessinas, Wayne King. I mean, there's just dozens of guys. I got to meet James
You gained their
Warren.
respect. Yeah.
I think that they appreciated that I appreciated them.
Sure.
And I think a lot of times what happens is when you hang up your driver's suit, you kind of feel like you get forgotten, right? What have you done for me lately? And like Tommy Ivo's a classic example. I think he thought that the drag racing deal was done for good and never coming back to the whole nostalgia movement, and the Hall of Fame came around. And I think if you asked him, it just revitalized his life. It was a reminder of some of the great things that he's done and an opportunity to get back out there and educate the newer fans and talk to them about the past days. So we're talking about my 73 Suburban. I remember towing to a race in Bakersfield one time. And again, I've got a tiny trailer. used race car and a rusted roof on my Suburban. And I thought I had the world by the balls. And again, I don't mean in a cocky way. I just thought I was so lucky. I was not just chasing my dream. I thought at that point I was fulfilling it. In 97, as an elevator guy, I spent more money than I really should have to go upgrade my license to a top alcohol dragster at the Frank Hawley School. And we are great friends to this day. He's one of the most important people I've ever met in my life. He's incredibly wise. And I wound up quitting my job and going to work for him full time. I never quit. We still work together. Last month, I took 2 days off of work. I drove up to Vegas and I helped him teach a class. Hadn't done that for a few years, and I forgot how much I missed that. But once I had the alcohol dragster license, I think it opened a couple more doors. Team out of Vegas, their driver had flown to China for business. They said, can you drive our car? We borrowed a fire suit. I don't know if Jim Head knows, but one of his crew guys, because the pro rigs had parked there for the national event the next week, he said, we're duct taping over all his name. It's a spare fire suit. Don't you ever tell anybody that we loaned this to you, or it'll be my butt there. But it was a great story. So I got to drive an alcohol car, and then I thought, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is as far as I was going to go. And I loved every minute of it. I think it's important to stress the journey, not the destination. And I know sometimes people might think that person's not sincere when they deliver a message like this, but if you knew me then, you'd knew that's absolutely the case. Is if I'd never made it into the pro category, I still feel like I achieved so many dreams in drag racing. Maybe the proof is the week after my last race in November. 1 week after, I was right back to work in the elevator trade. And if that's all drag racing's got for me, it's more than I ever thought. I hope there's something more, but I will never say my life won't be fulfilled if I can't get back in a car. But if you have $3.4 million, we can be back.
I know a driver.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, as the story goes that I read, the reason, certainly one of the reasons you went to work at Frank Harley's drag racing school is he was so impressed with you, well-spoken, liked you right away, and offered you an opportunity to join that.
Well, maybe. So Frank said there's 3 things I need from somebody. He was going to expand. He and Ray Evernham were going to open up a stock car school at Irwindale, which they did. And he was thinking about 2 locations, Pomona and then back to Gainesville. And he said, I can't afford to pay anybody to do this right now, but I can't afford to be looking for somebody when I need somebody. So I need 3 people, or 3 qualities in a person. I need credibility in the sport. I need the ability to dissect the run perfectly to the student, and the ability to relay that to him. He says, you talk well, you've got good credibility in the industry, no idea how you're going to be on evaluating runs. I'd like you to come up and work with me. School was run out of Pomona, closed down for the month of September because of the LA County Fair. They went up to Bakersfield. I scheduled my hernia surgery, which I kept putting off, so I didn't have to take any more time off work. Really tough walking up to the starting line, but spent 2 days with Frank up there, and he said, okay, I like this. And he didn't have an opening yet. I went back to work in the elevator trade. I'm like, well, I guess that's not going to happen. 3 months later, he called. He said, are you ready to do this? And it was a huge cut in pay. I mean, percentage-wise, it was a huge cut in pay. I was called an idiot by a lot of my racing friends. And it was one of the best decisions I made in my life.
Do you feel like it paid dividends when you became a driver in Funny Car?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I got in a top fuel car before I got in Funny Car, but Frank has a way. I always thought of myself as a thinking driver, but if I was going to make a metaphor about it, I was the guy that had a bunch of scribbled notes in various pieces. Frank's way of thinking about things helps you organize those and put in a table of contents, and everything is seamless and in order, and it makes sense. And he's so incredibly logical. And we talk about things, whether it's political or decisions you make in your life of, I feel this way, or it just seems this way. And a lot of times you get led down a bad path that way. Decisions need to be made based on logic. Now, love is a different story, but Frank is just so logical. And when he explains something to you, the light bulb goes on. You may have heard the same thing 10 times from 10 other people in the past. He has just got a unique way of communicating things.
I have Paul Yaw, the guy that owns one of the teams that we race with. I've always said this to him. He just has a unique way of explaining stuff where you grasp it right away. You just understand fully right away.
So when I would teach the schools, Frank, for the first year or so, would still do the seminars, the lectures, until he moved back to Gainesville and I took over Pomona. And if I could get all the stuff done with the guys with the race cars down on the track, I'd run back up and sit in the class and grab my notepad. Nobody has sat through more of his lectures than me. Nobody. And I learned something every single time. It's just that interesting to listen to.
You always heard something different.
Yeah. And he'd change it up in a little bit. But the really rewarding thing is the school was designed to help people drive cars down a drag strip in a safe fashion and to do things the correct way every time. But we have heard dozens and dozens and dozens from a 16-year-old in high school to a grandpa, but usually from parents who would come drive the car, listen to Frank's lectures, and at the end of the second day, they'd stay after class. He said, you know what? I think he just changed my life. My relationship with my son or daughter, it's going to be different and it's going to be better based on some things I learned about myself by coming to learn how to drive a race car.
We've had a chance to spend some time with Jack Beckman here on this episode of The Skinny, and what sounds like a lot of hard work, but yet fun and games on a trajectory that has gone all but straight up. Well, it was anything but. And we're going to talk about some of the struggles that he had throughout the middle of his career. Stay with us. We'll be right back. The one thing that caught my eye, though, is something that Rico is currently living through right now with his daughter. I lived through it with my daughter, and you went through it personally. You were diagnosed in 2004 with lymphoma, cancer, and you had to deal with that while you were racing, and the way you did it impressed people.
The Skinny is brought to you by Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04. General Tires. General Tires delivers. And Toyota. Toyota, let's go places.
Once again, we are back here with Jack Beckman on The Skinny. Great show coming at you here, and it's good to hear how people that have made it to the top level of the sport have found their way in. There's no two paths. We've done this show for the better part of a year and a half, almost 2 years now, and there's no two stories alike. That's the beauty of this show and what we love about it. The one thing that caught my eye, though, is something that Rico is currently living through right now with his daughter. I lived through it with my daughter, and you went through it personally. You were diagnosed in 2004 with lymphoma, cancer, and you had to deal with that while you were racing, and the way you did it impressed people.
So I was 37, I believe I just turned 38 after my first chemo. Single, no kids, and really passionate about drag racing. And I had a good job with good insurance. So I remember about September of 2003. At that point, I knew it was in pretty good contention for the championship. It literally came down to the last two races of the year. But in September, I knew I had a legitimate shot at it. And I'd flown out to Indy. I had driven the Holly rig back to Florida. And then I flew home after that. I just remember I wasn't feeling good. And I didn't know why. Had no clue why. Just wasn't feeling good. And I never quite got over it. Feel good for a week, bad for a week. It just couldn't figure out what was going on. Was I stressing out? Was I not eating right? And I'd go to the doctor, and they did some blood work. Everything looked fine. And then about, I want to say February of 2004, I was at Phoenix. I was doubled over in the pits in my motorhome. Just the pain was bad. And they gave me some antibiotics, and the next day I felt fine. I thought, well, that was that. Anyway, fast forward another month, I start getting a lump on my neck, and I still was having these weird kidney and abdominal pains. So they did a biopsy on one of my neck. And I was at school on a Tuesday teaching the class, and it hurt to walk. And by the time the class was over, it felt like somebody was holding their thumb and jabbing it inside my right kidney. It was that bad. In the meantime, I had gone to a urologist. They had prescribed the biopsy. He got the results. He left me a phone message. I'm going to a convention in San Francisco. Come in next week. We'll sit down and talk. I made an emergency appointment because it just hurt too bad. And I went into this other doctor who I had never met's office, and he opens my folder and he says, okay, looks like you got lymphoma. We'll need to start chemotherapy. And this is all brand new. My mom died at 50 of cancer. Worst thing I've ever been through. Me having cancer compared to losing my mom from cancer, not even remotely close. But I hadn't heard that. And I'm telling you,
That was the first time. He
Oh,
just
yeah.
opened the book and that was it.
You got lymphoma, and we're going to start chemotherapy. And I said, wait a minute, you're talking about cancer, right? Yeah, not the greatest bedside manner. But I hurt so bad physically at that point. He could have told me we have to take both your legs off, and I'd say go ahead. Anyway, it was quite a journey.
He's currently still, his daughter's still going through it. Mine was diagnosed with bilateral Wilms tumors when she was 8 months old, given a 40% chance of long-term survival. She's now 34 with 3 kids, and she's lived a very healthy life. I mean, we were very fortunate to find the big tumor, that doctor finding it at the time. My mother also passed from colon cancer. She had the test, but they missed it. It was at the very end of the colon, and they missed it by the time they found it. It was too late. But you said something to me that reminded me of that. And I remember my mother was in so much pain at the end of her life that we couldn't even touch her arm. It hurt. She was in that much pain, at the time. It's, as you said, and his story with his daughter, who's gone through blood transfusions, and she's dealt with the complications from that.
Yeah, so she had the chemo. Well, first of all, it took him quite some time to get it figured out, and which we moved from that hospital for all reasons.
That's why they call it a practice.
Right.
They miss it a lot. My primary care physician called me to apologize to me, which I thought was impressive.
That's pretty amazing.
And he said, we missed it, and I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. And so we get her moved after, they diagnosed her, but then it just was going on and on and on, and I felt like the treatment was bad. I reached out to my good friend Chuck Pagano, the Colts, former coach of the Colts, and he had been at IU Cancer Center, the Simon Cancer Center. Went down there within 3 hours of meeting with the doctor. It was amazing. It was like we had a path. This is where we're going. Goes through the bone marrow transplant. Ends up the chemo really burnt up the nerves in her feet, so she has neuropathy real bad. But she had a bone marrow transplant when COVID started, and we never saw her for another 60 days. And she was, so she was in there. Difficult to talk about today, but the cancer is gone. We're still dealing with a lot of the aftermath and the pain, little host versus donor, some things like that. But she's getting better, and just as of recently, her attitude has changed, which is the biggest thing.
It's nice to have light ahead of you. You got something to keep you busy, something to keep you occupied, purpose, family, whatnot. But as tough as it is for the person who's going through cancer, it doesn't hold a candle to what the loved ones deal with because of the sense of helplessness. And for you guys, I couldn't even imagine having a child going through that. There's just nothing worse in life than having to deal with the prospect that your kids are going to be sick.
Yeah.
When we come back, we'll make the transition from a life-threatening sickness to the top of the sport.
When the new drivers come to me and say, hey, how do you know when it's shaking the tires? I said, that's easy. 3 things happen. Lightning will strike, a neon sign goes off in the windshield, and God will come over the radio and let you know. My point is, there will be no mistaking what is going on when that car shakes the tire.
Once again, welcome back to the Skinny. We're in Speedway, Indiana. That's where everything big goes down. Of course, it is the heartland when it comes to racing. We love it around here. All right, so we just talked about you surviving that tough battle with cancer, and people were watching as you pushed your way through, including Dexter Tuttle, the Comstocks, and it really earned you a ride in the Top Fuel car, the MTS car, and you made 12 starts in that car.
Yeah, so Roger and Karen Comstock were great friends of mine. Now, she had just called me out of the blue, and she said, we're having some problems with our Super Comp and Super Gas cars. Would you mind coming out to the track and helping us out? I'm like, yeah, sure. I'm $250 a day or whatever it is. And I went out there on a day. We were also testing a front motor car, so I told her, I said, listen, I'm not going to be able to give you all the attention that I told you. How about we cut it in half, make it $125? They never paid me. But my God, they made up for it a millionfold. Roger's been a super successful businessman, and he and I were standing in the staging lanes at Phoenix in 2004, And I had, 2005. I just got done with chemo October the year before. And we're standing amongst the top fuel cars. The national anthem stops, and he looks at me. And you'd have to know, Roger, but he said, "You really want to do this, don't you?" And Karen had survived breast cancer. So Roger was, again, he was the helpless feeling one in that situation. Karen helped me out tremendously, spending time with me while I was going through the chemo. And Roger was always supportive. And I said, yeah. And he goes, all right, let's talk to some people. So we approached Dexter Tuttle, and then the Comstocks through their mail terminal services company, which was doing all the military mail in Afghanistan and Iraq at that time. So it really, everything kind of fit with my military background. And I got to run 12 races. And at the end of 2005, we were going to put together a program for Don Schumacher to add another dragster, and it didn't materialize. And I went back to racing my Super Comp car, and I said, okay, that was it. I'm 38. I'd survived cancer, and I got to fulfill my dream. I got to drive a top fuel dragster. By the way, I was always a top fuel guy. I love funny cars, but I was always a dragster guy because they were the kings of the sport. And it wasn't till summer of 06, Don Schumacher called Roger, and he said, what would you and Jack think about a funny car? And I'd driven a sportsman funny car and driven a top alcohol funny car right into the wall at Phoenix. So anyway.
Got that out of the way.
Yeah.
Super experience.
Yeah. Really good job there, Jack. We didn't tell Schumacher that. And I thought, well, I mean, my God, everything that guy does is competitive. Hell, I'd hop on one of his pro stock motorcycles if I had the fortitude. But yeah, let's do that. And he said, well, the first thing you got to do is you got to fly out, and we're going to stick you in the car. And we wound up doing it here, Indy, pre-race, the week before the national event. And he said, I just want to make sure when they lower the body on you with the car running, you don't pee your pants. There's just no way of moving any further if we can't get past that. So I made 2 squirts in the car. Fortunately, they went well. Didn't
Squirts?
hit anything. No,
That's a nice terminology.
Yeah, yeah. That's what we wear thick
In
fire
his
suits
pants,
for.
cars, whatever.
Yeah.
Close enough.
They said, what did you smell like afterwards? I said, depends.
Walk us through the first sensation of rattling the tires hard. I mean, we've heard these. I mean, honestly, I guess if you want to look at an extreme, case, there are drivers that have lost their life because they've rattled them so hard it bangs their head off the inside of the roll cage, and a lot of that safety stuff has been advanced, so hopefully we don't ever see that again.
Well,
but
and
it's violent. The point is, it's violent.
Well, but there's also a lot of the old timers that drove in the 60s that are showing cognitive decline from all the tire shake over the decades there. So, okay, so a better way to explain it is when the new drivers come to me and say, hey, how do you know when it's shaking the tires? I said, that's easy. 3 things happen. Lightning will strike, a neon sign goes off in the windshield, and God will come over the radio and let you know. My point is, there will be no mistaking what is going on when that car shakes the tires. It's going to go out there, and it is the crazy thing about that is I would love to have a simulator here to see if we could keep our eyes open, if it's even possible to keep your eyes open. I find with me...
We have one.
And especially when...
It's a paint shaker.
Right. When we went to the laid-back headers, one of the byproducts of the laid-back headers is it didn't distort the rear tires as much. In effect, it gave you more traction. So when one of those cars starts to spin the tires, it still has traction more so than the old-style headers. And hang on, because it's going to turn into tire shake even if it didn't start at tire shake. My point being, when you lift off the throttle, it's like when you hit your thumb with a hammer. The pain hasn't got to its crescendo just yet. And what I find out here at Indy one year on a qualifying night run, it shook, I lifted, and it shook so bad, my neck got super hot, and I thought, I just broke my neck. And the car's coasting, I hit the fuel shut off, made sure the brake worked, and about 15 seconds later, I moved a little bit, I wiggled, I'm like, I don't know what that was, but it sure as hell got my attention.
Some of the crazy stories that go on in drag racing. Stay with us. We're not finished yet. This guy is still sitting right alongside. We'll be back.
One of the questions they asked is the cost of racing then versus the cost of racing now. And Jim Dunn is full of so many witticisms. If you could ever get him to talk for half an hour, you can't write down all the great things he says. But he said drag racing 50 years ago cost exactly the same as it does today. Every penny you have.
The Skinny is brought to you by General Tires. General Tires delivers. Toyota. Toyota. Let's go places. And Fatheads Eyewear. Fatheads Eyewear, hardcore since '04.
Welcome back to the Skinny. Yes, we're laughing because this guy doesn't stop talking. It's unbelievable. Jack Beckman inside the house with us here and telling us some great stories, some great behind-the-scenes stuff, documented from the time he got going as a young child, scrapped his way up in, fought his way through cancer, then earned his way into a Don Schumacher Top Fuel Funny Car ride, countless wins, won a championship. You've entered the game. And then in 2020, the game was over for you, at least as it stands today. Certainly you're ready to go tomorrow, given the opportunity. But for the people that are out there that have not been in the game, it's very difficult to understand just how difficult it is to do what you've done.
100%. And the other thing is, everybody wishes well. I love the fans. I've developed a lot of great relationships from the fans. And I remember in 2020 hearing from dozens of people, you're going to be fine, somebody's going to sponsor you. A lot of people just don't understand the nuances of trying to go find money and what really happens out there. And in drag racing especially, the driver's expected to be a big part of the money program there. It was pretty obvious to me. It wasn't looking good. Doug Chandler had extended what was a 3-year relationship that Terry Chandler had started to do, not just our Infinite Hero car, but the Make-A-Wish car, and we changed lives. I got to tell you, not only do I like winning races and running hard, we changed some lives. I've met some lifetime friends. I've been in a room with 8 Medal of Honor recipients at once. I mean, things I never would have thought that would be bestowed upon me. I didn't necessarily do anything specifically to deserve that, and I got that. But Doug Chandler, after Terry passed, said, I want to do this for 3 more years in her honor. And I knew he wasn't going to do it any longer than that. He's not a gearhead like Terry was. And it was a tough year in 2020 to try to get sponsors to come to the races. With COVID, it was 4 Indy races. There was 3 months off. It was just an odd year. And I got a company to come out there, and they liked what they saw. But they might want a 2-race deal, and they were vested in other ones, and it just didn't work out. So I was so fortunate after 22 years away from the elevator industry. And let me back up. I was up at the March meet in Bakersfield to watch the Nostalgia Drags in March of 2020. Good buddy of mine, Mike, I'd known him since the day I started in the elevator trade, hardcore drag race fan, still an elevator man. I said, you think there's any shot of getting back in the trade? He said, let me make a couple calls. He called the union. He called Schindler Elevator. We talked, said, yeah, I think you can get back in. After 22 years away, the week after that race, I got to go back to a great job. And I have worked in the last 12 months, 1,300 hours of overtime. You do the math on it, that's a lot of weeks. And let me tell you, I'm so glad that I appreciated getting to do what I did and didn't look a gift horse in the mouth when I was a drag race driver. Because when you're working for a living, those are the men and women that I have all the respect in the world for. The fact that race car drivers get to go out and get paid to do something they love to do, man, that's not work. And then you go back and you see a lot of my coworkers have been in the trade 35 years, and they're showing up every day to get it done. And it's made my outlook even better, I think.
Since you've been in the sport as a driver, do you look at somebody like a John Force or a Don Schumacher that has survived this sport as a business a little bit differently?
Oh, I've always worshipped at the altar of John Force. I mean, I'm so grateful to Don Schumacher and what he's done for me. But, you know, John Force can be controversial to some people, never to me. He can do no wrong in my eyes. And it's not because I don't think he does everything right. It's because he's done so many things right that people don't even know about. And he's just generous to a fault. He's helpful. He's just unique. That he is the antithesis of that archetypal race car driver. Cool, calm, collect, aloof, quiet. John's none of that. And yet he's the greatest funny car driver that has ever lived. And the fact that he can still do this at 73 and still wants to do it at that age, it boggles my mind.
And still get it.
Oh, he's still competitive.
And the businessman side of him. You don't just stumble onto this many years and stay alive with this many cars. That's kind of where I was going with the Don Schumacher and the John Force thing. But the business side of the sport is so brutal. You talked about how hard it is to find the money. These guys keep showing up year after year after year.
I've gotten a lot of inquiries. When are you coming back? And here's the reality. My son's 15. We just bought him a Legends car. Just went and picked it up in Idaho last week. So probably next month he'll debut in that. And I'm excited that he's passionate about something. I am thrilled about that because I think I can teach him a lot of mechanical, electrical, and life lessons around a race car. I frankly just don't have the time to look for money. And when I do, I'm terrible with no's. And I'm not great at it, and I've been discouraged too many times by it. And I hate to sound like I'm being a passenger, but I think if there's an opportunity for me in the seat in the future, it's going to be because, maybe Forrest decides he wants to step out of the seat and put me in the car. Because frankly, you really have to be out there 5 days a week looking for money to make this happen. And the fact that Schumacher did it so well, so long, and that Forrest has not just survived, he's thrived. I mean, he's literally built an empire from nothing in drag racing.
Real estate empire.
Yeah. And
major
Gary
real estate.
Dencham and I have become great friends. I inducted Dencham in the Hall of Fame. 51 years of driving a Nitro Funny Car. That guy does all the work on it in his garage, in his 70s, everything from fixing the transporter to rebuilding the clutch packs to putting the cylinder heads on. It's just mind-blowing to be around people that are that passionate about something. And I don't think you can help but have some of that rub off on you. And I think it's a very positive influence.
Is he retired as a teacher now?
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
assuming?
yeah,
Okay.
long since. But he's
Yeah.
what a storyteller. You want to talk about somebody that's been there, done that, and has the stories to talk about it. And I just enjoy being in the same room with these people.
I remember chatting with Dencham one time. Well into his career, and he looked at me. He said, "Still the same waist size I was when I was in high school. Still right at wrestling weight." I was like, "Oh my God, guy is hardcore, man."
The Lions Museum deal I went to last week, and Dencham was there. Jim Dunn was there, and I loved when Jim's 50th anniversary in drag racing happened a decade ago. They interviewed him. And one of the questions they asked is the cost of racing then versus the cost of racing now. And Jim Dunn is full of so many witticisms. If you could ever get him to talk for half an hour, you can't write down all the great things he says. But he said drag racing 50 years ago cost exactly the same as it does today. Every penny you have.
That is well said. Absolutely. And with that, I think we're going to wrap things up. I don't know how we could close it any better. It's been an absolute pleasure. Rico, thanks for joining us here. Michael, thanks again for the new clock. We appreciate it, man. I don't know what we'd do without it. And, of course, Whit Bazemore, thank you for taking the time, man.
Well, it said that under the duct tape on the fire suit, yes.
Yeah, just underneath there. So we appreciate you coming on here, man. The stories are awesome. You are very well-spoken. I think you're a great ambassador for the sport and certainly served us very well.
Well, I hope to be an ambassador on the racetrack again one time. Thanks. We really had a great time today doing the Midwest deal, too.
All right. So there you go. Jack Beckman, Fast Jack. Pull for him anytime you see him out at the racetrack. Hope you enjoyed this edition of The Skinny. We'll see you next time with another fabulous driver.